And we are discussing chapter 22 today. Chapter 22 covers the respiratory system, and there's so much information that we could go over, but I decided to try to stay on track. We would focus on the four processes of respiration, what it is from beginning to end, and what's going on within that system. I like to think of it as laundry. I know that seems silly, but I can make that make a little bit more sense. So when you're dealing with laundry, it's either clean or dirty. There's no in between. Um, Clean clothes are hung up in the closet or folded in the drawers, and they're wearable, they're usable. But once you've worn them, they are dirty, and they must go into the laundry and be washed. And once they've been washed and cleaned, then you're able to wear them again and they are usable again. Same idea. When we take in oxygen, it's good and it's usable and our body uses it. But once it's used, it comes back out as CO2 and our body has to process it before it's usable again. I'll make this make a little bit more sense, I promise. But for me, that's just the way I think of it. It's a very basic way of thinking. So let's go ahead and move on to the first slide. So let's see. All right, so now we are on stage one. Or process one, however you'd like to think of it. This is pulmonary ventilation. This is when we breathe. It's going to involve inspiration and expiration. Breathe in, breathe out. I think that's one of the basic ways to calm yourself, and it's really, it makes a lot of sense. It's just a moment to recoup and recenter, and that's what I always think of when I think of breathing in and breathing out. It's a time to bring peace in and push out the bad. In with the good, out with the bad. And that's exactly what's happening. You're bringing in good, usable oxygen and putting out CO2. It's dirty and useless at that point. So, with pulmonary ventilation, inspiration moves that air into the lungs from out around us, whether that be good or bad. And depending on the environment, there are some smog-filled areas and places like that. But typically we think of breathing in that good, usable oxygen. And then expiration, we are going to move the air out of the lungs into the surrounding atmosphere. And, that process is an in and out, in and out, in and out. And our bodies do it without really even thinking about it for the most part. But now we do see people who really have issues, health issues, and this chapter covers so many different respiratory disorders and things that can cause that in and out to not be quite as simple. I know for my dad, he has COPD and black lung. So his lungs do not function like they need to. And breathing it in isn't an issue. It's the usage once it's in there. And it's so difficult to see him struggle. He has been on oxygen full time at all times for about 8, maybe as much as 12 years, honestly. My son was very young whenever my dad's health started declining. And for a long time, wearing that supplemental oxygen really made things work. But unfortunately, we are seeing here recently that even with his oxygen on, his body is not processing it like he needs to. And it's very difficult to see that he doesn't get around like he used to and do the things he used to love, because even with that oxygen, he's just struggling to really get use of the oxygen that's coming in. But that is for another slide. Okay, so now we're going to move on to stage 2. And in stage 2, we are going to see that the pulmonary gas exchange is happening. This is when O2 diffuses from the lungs into the blood, and then CO2 diffuses out of the blood back into the lungs. So this is your changing station, essentially. And this stage is important for the proper balance of oxygen and CO2 for the body. So we see this is really when it's swapping out. So this is like the good clothes coming out of the dryer and being useful, and those bad clothes are going into the washer, and it's a never-ending cycle. Same with breathing, and same with this pulmonary gas exchange. In with the good, out with the bad. That's what we're going to see happening all the time. Okay, next we are moving to stage 3. This is the transport of respiratory gases. So in this stage, we see that the cardiovascular system is transporting the gases using blood as the transportation fluid. This is how it's getting it from point A to point B. It is going to move the O2. It's going to be transported from the tissue cells of the body, and then the CO2 is transported from the tissue cells to the lungs. So the blood is going to take O2, good, nice, sweet, clean oxygen, and take it from the tissue cells all the way out to the body. It's going to take it where it's needed. And then once it's used, it's going to come back as CO2, and it's going to be transported from the tissue cells back to the lungs so it can be treated again. All right, and next we are going to see stage 4. So this is the tissue gas exchange. This is when we see that O2 diffuses from blood to the tissue cells, and then the CO2 diffuses from the tissue cells back to the blood. So again, it's in a cycle, a constant cycle that is going to take the good where it is needed, and once it's been used, it's going to come back dirty, and then it's going to be cleaned, put out, and it's going to come back in good. The tissue cells are going to use the oxygen and produce CO2 during this cellular respiration. So we see that the in with the good and out with the bad, that is kind of my mindset with this respiratory system process. And you just have to think, we're going to have our body function without us even thinking about it. We don't sit and go, breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. Our brain and our body just knows what it's doing. Like as I speak, my body is able to breathe in and breathe out while I'm talking. It's magical. I think it's a fabulous thing to think that our bodies are so special and designed just exactly perfect for every task that they have set before them. But we see that in many cases things happen, and when there's damage to certain parts of our body, our respiratory system, our circulatory system, all these things that work together so perfectly, then struggle. That is when we see issues come about where machines have to be used to handle those things if our body is damaged in certain ways. And I talked about my dad earlier, and he was a coal miner for a while. Unfortunately, he did smoke even for part of his life. So when he first was diagnosed with black lung, it was something that was questioned. He went through many biopsies. They actually found a mass in his lungs, and that is how the whole journey got started. But when they went in and pulled the mass out, it was actually coal. Coal was collecting around his lungs and inside of his lungs, and it was unbelievable the damage that had done. And it just shows you that breathing these things in our surroundings, it goes back to when we talk about the I think it was the first slide. We talked about the environment around us. That is the air that you're breathing in is that environment around you, and that really can be detrimental if it's not healthy, clean, fresh air. So that's when we go into thinking, what are we breathing in? What are we putting in our lungs? All of these things matter because everything that comes in is processed through our lungs, and our lungs are going to use what we put in it. So really food for thought for those that maybe vape or smoke. It really will turn you off from those types of things, because the damage that can be done is astronomical, and our lungs have to process and clean and put out or deal with these byproducts that we put in that are negative. So really it's food for thought when it comes to those things. So this is just a quick recap of the respiratory system and the processes by which oxygen and CO2 are processed within our lungs. So, thank you so much. Have a great day.